Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavatu Tejasvinavadhidamastu ma Dvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. So we will continue the discussion. So yesterday, on day for yesterday, I was trying to give a brief sketch of the Vedic scheme of life, the Vedic way of life. And now we are going to deal with the Vedantic way of life. So I should say something about this transition, this evolution from Vedic to Vedantic. Now, the Vedic literature is broadly divided into two groups. In fact, all the four Vedas have got these two categories. One, dealing with dharma. Dharma here implies certain rules and regulations, principles of righteousness, justice, truthfulness, which help us to preserve, to maintain a cosmic order. This cosmic order was sometimes called Ritam in the Vedic language. So when we follow the principles of Dharma, we act and live in such a way as not to disturb the rhythm, the harmony, the inherent harmony and integrity of cosmic existence. To give an example, when we construct a dam in the river, or when we cut down trees, when we do something which could be called an act of violation against nature, or when we do harm to another person, stealing, or murder, things like that, telling lies, and so on. All these activities, whether it's an act of violence against nature, or an act of violence against fellow human beings, or other members of the world, members of the animal kingdom, we are going against Dharma, because that upsets the inherent nature, rhythm of existence. And it is called, the opposite of Dharma is called Adharma. So we should not do that. We should act and behave in such a manner that a cosmic order is preserved. So it's called Dharma. Now this Dharma ideal is the central theme of the earlier portion of Vedic literature. So it helps you to live in this world, to acquire the tools and means for living in this world, money, wealth and so on, to fulfill your expectations or desires, but without violating the principles of Dharma. This is the central theme of the earlier portion of the Vedas. It's called Karma Kanda, the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. The early Vedic stage mostly deals with this particular aspect. In the later Vedic literature, called Vedanta or the Upanishads, we find much more profound, much deeper metaphysical and spiritual questions discussed. What's the meaning of life? What's the nature of existence? What's the ultimate destiny of human existence? And so on. What's the nature of God? And so on. So all these deeper metaphysical and spiritual questions are discussed in the later portion of the Vedas, called the Vedanta, sometimes called the Upanishads. Sometimes called Jnana Kanda, means that portion of the Vedas which deals with knowledge, higher spiritual knowledge. Now yesterday I read this convocation, Vedamanucya Acharya Handevasya Manishasti, etc., where a teacher is giving some instructions to a student, a pupil who has completed his education in the Vedic hermitage and is about to return home to start his life as an householder. So he is asked to follow the principles of Dharma, to respect his parents, teachers and guests, to do his duty to his family, society, and also to the kingdom, and to act and conduct in such a way as not to violate the principles of dharma, to continue his education as long as he lives. So whenever he finds any learned person, when he meets a learned person, he should try to learn from him, and he should continue his education. He should enrich his knowledge and his life through a process of continuous learning which has no end. But the whole purpose is to live a happy and harmonious life in this world. Nothing transcendental about it. In this particular convocation, address that I read. Now, when you come to Vedanta, there are higher, deeper questions, philosophical and spiritual themes discussed very elaborately. Now, I thought I will interpret this transition from Vedic to Vedantic scheme of life with the help of an illustration that you can find in the Kathopanishads. It also belongs to the Krishna Yajurveda tradition. Here, again, is a family setting. A great man, a rich man, an householder, who has got a great reputation as a philanthropist, or may have got it somehow, as you find it eventually. He is conducting an elaborate Vedic ritual, a yajna, which is called Vachapeya. Vachapeya yajna. Vachapeya is one of the 7 important Vedic rituals that prevailed during the early Vedic times, like Somayaga, Agnihotra, Vachapeya, Aptoryama, Dhiratram, and so on. Many of these rituals are still being preserved in some selected small parts of India. Now, for example, the Vajpayam is the yajna. You may have heard of Vajpayee, who was the Prime Minister of India for a short time. He had not performed this yajna or anything, but it shows that one of his distant ancestors might have performed, so he got that name. That's how sometimes names stick to families, though they're totally innocent of all these things. So the point is this: one day, as this ritual was in progress, his son comes to him. Vajasrava is the name of this householder who is performing this yajna. Means he had a great reputation as a great ritualist. And this son was closely watching this ritual. A very important part of this ritual was a formal giving away of all his possessions as gifts to needy people. So in those days, what were the possessions? Horses, gold, cattle, and maybe chariots and things like that. So he was giving away all this. And he was giving a gift of cows to needy people. But as the son found out, as he closely watched, he found the father was selecting old cows which cannot give any milk, which cannot eat grass, and which may perhaps need plenty of fodder also. So it will be a big burden, a liability if somebody receives such cows. So Pitodaga Jagdadruna Dugdadoga Nirintriyaha, a very graphic, picturesque description of the type of cows that this man was distributing among the needy people who have assembled there. I mean, cannot drink any more water, cannot give any more milk, can't eat any grass, nothing. So it was a kind of duplicity and hypocrisy. But the son found out, but he can't go and ask his father, why are you giving away all these useless things, useless cows? So The son was a very wise man. In those days, some of the greatest philanthropists used to perform a ritual at the end of a Vedic ritual, Vedic sacrifice. That is giving away all his possessions. And then he will go to Ganga, the banks of Ganga, which is a holy river, and sit there and spend the rest of his lifetime in contemplation and meditation and pass away, leaving his home behind. It had a special name called Sarvaswa Dhanam. Sarvaswa means all that you possess. Dhanam means giving away, making a gift of. And the boy knew that. He was a very intelligent, very spiritually a very, very sensitive person. So you find a transition from ritualism to higher philosophy in Vedic society. It's an interesting glimpse you find in this elaborate episode. So the boy went to the father and asked him, "To whom are you going to give me?" Now the question is somewhat ridiculous. His father was giving away cattle, cows. You should give milk to those who receive it. And here is a little boy. Now there is a scriptural justification for this question. The highest and the most precious wealth of a father or a family is an intelligent, faithful son or daughter, depending upon the context. And he was the only son. Nachiketa is the name of the son, little boy, small boy. So according to one interpretation of ancient scriptures, the most precious wealth of a father or mother is an obedient, good-natured, responsible son or daughter. That you even know it is true. It should be true. Sometimes unfortunately it may not be, but it ought to be true in all ages, in all societies. So interpreting this, giving this interpretation to this ritual, he goes to the father and asks him, "To whom are you going to give me?" Kasmai mam dasasidi. This is the question. I am just quoting from the Kathopanishad. Wherever there is need to quote, I shall just quote. Later you can read all this in the text if you want. Kasmai mam dasasidi. To whom are you going to give me? The father looked at the boy. He got angry. But the boy repeated this question 3 times. Ditiyam tridiyam saho vaja kasmai mam dasasidi. The Upanishad says. He asked twice and 3 times. The father got angry. And now if a father gets angry with a child who becomes a nuisance, when the father is busy doing some important work, what will you do? Oh, you go and get lost. Something. You should not say, but sometimes it happens. But in this context, the father says, Mrittive tvam dadamiti. I am going to give you to the Lord of Death. Mrityu is the Lord of Death. He is not a huge, terrible monster. He is a divine being who is in charge of taking the departed souls to a higher world. That's the meaning. He could be a great philosopher himself. He must have been a great ritualist, and because of his auspicious deeds, he may have got this high office, meaning the Lord of Death. That is the meaning. So he will have many angels to assist him to take the departed souls to the higher world after people die. Now, so this was the response from the father. The boy listened to this. Now, according to ancient Vedic tradition, you get a glimpse of the Vedic scheme of life when you read these Upanishads. These modern Upanishads have been subjected to intensive studies by great anthropologists, sociologists, not only philosophers and mystics, but even by sociologists and anthropologists. So they have often written many books depicting the picture of society as it prevailed during the Vedic times. So the boy thought, my father has made a gift of me to the Lord of Death. At least he said so much in so many words. Maybe he was trying to tell me, please get lost, don't disturb me. I am now engaged in this important ritual. But the boy wanted to make his father's words come true. He wanted to see that his father's words would not go in vain. So he starts his journey to the abode of Lord of Death. That's how there is a mythology involved in this episode, and there is a higher spiritual truth also involved. So a great metaphysical spiritual doctrine is interpreted with the illustration of an episode, mythological story. So the boy starts his journey to the Lord of Death. When he reached there, he was not there. His name is Yama. Yama is the Lord of Death, is the name of the Lord of the Death. When he reached his palace, he was away. And he waited. He didn't eat food. Maybe his relatives must have asked him, welcomed him, please sit, he said, what have you come for? He said, I want to meet the Lord of Death. But he's away, he'll be back only after 3 days. As you can come after 3 days. He said, no, I won't go back till I have met the Lord of Death. Then why don't you stay and have your food and stay for 3 days there? He refused to eat and drink for 3 days. That is an important point of this story. The boy remained without food for 3 days. And the 3rd day, the Lord of Death returned home, and he found a small boy waiting to meet him, and he made inquiries and found out that he had not eaten or drunk water even for the last 3 days. So he became very repentant, because if a person, a spiritual seeker especially, if he comes to your home and if he remains without food, then what happens? It may be very inauspicious to the household. I shall deal with this particular belief system, which is an important part of Vedic culture. We will come to that later. I mean, karma and its subtle implications, which we found a very important aspect of Vedantic and Vedic way of life. So the householder, the host, Yama, became very dependent, and he told the boy, look here, I'm sorry you remained here without eating and drinking, and I was away for 3 days. So as a compensation, I can give you 3 boons, divine boons. So, Tisrovasi Yadhavasi Grike Me Anasnan Brahman Adhir Namasya. That's the thing. Say you have remained here. Brahmin, you have remained here without eating and drinking, without any food for 3 days. Namastestu Brahman Sustimestu. Tasma Putrin Varan Vrinishwa. So, my salutations to you as a compensation for this unfortunate event. You remained here without food in my home. I want you to ask me 3 boons which I am going to grant you. Now, this little boy asked 3 boons which form a very important part of this Upanishad. In a way, it throws a flashlight into some of the unique features of Vedic culture and Vedic philosophy. Vedantic culture, Vedantic philosophy. The first question that this boy asked is very simple. When I return home, my father should not beat me, should not be angry with me. should not quarrel with me. He should not scold me. So he says, Shanta Sankalpa Sumano Yadhasya Veda Manyu Gautamo Mabhimurtyo. I mean, if my father would be Shanta Sankalpa, I mean, he should be very calm and quiet. He should not be angry. Where did he go without my permission? Little boy who flees from his home without parents' permission. You can imagine. So he is frightened. If he goes home, his father will be angry, may scold him. So the first boon is very simple, which any boy would have asked. I have left my home without my father's permission. So when I go home, when I return home, my father should not be angry with me. And he should speak to me in a very calm, loving, affectionate language. This is the first boon that I am asking. To prasishtam ma abhivade prasida edatrayana prathamam varanduni. This is the first boon I am asking. I left my home without my father's permission, and he will be angry with me when I return home. So that should not happen. He should treat me, greet me, welcome me back home without any anger, without scolding me. Yama for little boy, it's all right. He readily granted this boon. Now, the commentators of the Upanishads, the later commentators, say this is the first state of human civilization. What do we want first? We want that domestic life, family life should be all right. We should have harmonious relationship in our homes with parents, children, brothers, sisters, and so on, without any friction. And we should have all necessary means for sustenance. That's the first state of human civilization, human culture. And there dharma is a central theme. Because if you want harmony and peace in our inner life or also in the family life, we must have a high ideal to hold fast to. Maybe this dharma can be interpreted in modern times as the concept of justice and fair play, equality, everyone equal before law. Everyone follows certain rules and regulations so that everyone will be able to enjoy the gifts of nature without any inequality, without any disturbance. We need a set of principles called dharma even to lead a material life. Dharma is not necessarily a principle for spiritual life alone. Dharma is an integral part of any kind of organized, systematic, balanced life. So Yama granted that. Now, if you study different civilizations, with the Sumerian, Babylonian, Aztec, Mayan, Incan, Greek, Chinese, Roman, any of these, Egyptian, all these civilizations, you find this principle, a system and orderliness necessary for leading a happy life in this world. And you also find, as Swami Vivekananda's lectures mentioned yesterday, a need for a higher value. I mean, what happens to us after we leave this body? What happens after death? Where do we go after death? Where do people go after death? This is a simple question which every intelligent person asks, not necessarily spiritual personalities. All people ask this question. What happens tomorrow? Means what happens after we have left this body behind. Now, in most civilizations, including the early Vedic civilization, the highest concept of a transcendental existence was heaven. Now, heaven in Abrahamic religions was a status that you gain after your death by the grace of God, where you live, which is a permanent entity. In fact, that's a basic difference between the concept of heaven in Abrahamic religions and the concept of heaven in the Vedic religion, Vedantic tradition. So, in all these Abrahamic traditions, including in the Buddhist tradition, but there is the concept of a transcendental existence. After you transcend the praditya samutpada, the twin link that constitute our earthly existence. When you completely are free from trishna or desire, you reach a highest stage of existence. So in all these traditions you find a concept of transcendental existence, or continuity of our life, but not necessarily an impermanent one, but a permanent status. We don't return from that. In our Vedantic tradition or Vedic tradition, heaven was just the result of all the good deeds that we do in this world. Heaven was a place where you enjoy the fruits, the results of all the meritorious deeds that you perform when we are living in this world with this body. And when we leave this body, we get another body. That's part of the Vedic philosophy, Vedantic culture. You get another body, celestial body, and with that body you enjoy the results of all the meritorious deeds that we perform in this world. For example, if you have helped a poor man, if you have done a great help to suffering people, if you perform poor feeding every day, or any of these, all these good deeds will produce a subtle and unseen potency, a result which will remain with us and which won't be lost when we die. So it's very interesting. The Vedic culture interprets human activities from three different perspectives. One is very obvious. When you give food to a hungry person, or when you give drinking water to a thirsty person, the most obvious result is that the person's thirst is quenched. That's all. And again, this act of charity will influence our character. It will enrich and it will make our character more noble. It has a purifying, a refining effect on our character and personality. The second impact, which are very obvious, which we can experience ourselves when we do something noble, something holy, something unselfish. You feel a kind of inner fulfillment. In fact, that's what everyone is seeking. That's why some people who become trillionaires after doing business, maybe through cutthroat practices, later on feel that they should part with some of their accumulated wealth, because that act of philanthropy gives them a kind of inner blissfulness of fulfillment, which you cannot buy in the markets. If you pay $1 million, you cannot buy that. It's a very precious thing. That's what everyone is seeking. Inner fulfillment, a kind of inner consolation. That's why we indulge, we engage in good philanthropical activities of kindness and charity. Now, these are very common, more or less found in all traditions. Now, Vedic culture suggests another, there's another impact. That is, That's called, technically it's called in English, sorry, in Sanskrit, Adrishtam and Apurvam. In English sometimes this is translated as subtle potency. That's how they translate many of these technical words. I shall try to explain. So when we do a charitable act, any meritorious deed, that action produces an invisible, a subtle force, a potency, which manifests later when we die. And this meritorious deed and its result, it's called adrishtam because it is invisible. It is called apurvam because it did not exist before you did that meritorious deed. So this subtle spiritual potency, it enables you to go to heaven after your death. And you live in heaven till you exhaust the results, you exhaust this potency. I mean the result of your meritorious deeds in this world. Now, Nachiketa asks for the second boon. He says, well, you are already guaranteed my peaceful life in my family. But after my death also, I must be able to enjoy heavenly comforts, peace and tranquility, and I should not have any problem. There is nothing very spiritual about the second boon or the first boon. Very ordinary. Nothing very spiritual. Just like you pray for a free, for permission to live in a five-star hotel for 100 years or maybe longer period. That's nothing more. Heaven is technically not a spiritual existence in Vedic tradition. It's just the natural result of meritorious deeds that you do in this world. So this is an important thing that you have to remember. Whatever we do, especially good deeds and bad deeds also, this is equally applicable to non-meritorious deeds as well. They produce a subtle, invisible potency, which later we have to enjoy or suffer, depending upon the type of activity, deed that we have done. Sometimes we find in our life, we do everything perfectly well. On the paper, everything is perfect. Nothing wrong. But then it doesn't click. A person, a businessman accumulates billions of dollars. But finally, you find some of the great cranks and some of the craziest figures were billionaires. There are stories of I did not narrate those things, not very pleasant stories. Accumulating billions of dollars, finally living miserable, depressed life. Now, how do you explain this strange, disconnect, to use a modern language? You have accumulated plenty of good things which you can enjoy, which naturally, in a worldly sense, ought to give you happiness and pleasure. But the result is misery and unhappiness and depression. That means there is something wrong with the means with which we acquired this wealth. So, it is not only the external activities that decide the nature of the result, but also that the quality, the type of means involved to produce the result. They also are determinative factors in deciding the type of results finally. Now, according to Vedic culture, if you have the right means and methods which do not conflict the principles of dharma, and if you follow those dharmic principles, then naturally you will get the results and you can enjoy life in heaven. This was the old Vedic belief, Vedantic belief. This is the second boon that Nachiketa is asking. So you can find the evolution from earthly, empirical level of existence to a kind of higher life. It's not higher in the spiritual sense, but after post-mortem happiness in heaven. So he says, Sattum Agnim Swargyam Adhyeshu Murtyu Prabruhitam Sadadhanaya Mahyam Swargaloka Amrutum Bhajanta Edadvitiyena Vare Vrne Varena. This is the meaning. I'm just quoting this verse. The meaning is this. Now Nachiketa, the little boy, is asking for the second boon. He's addressing Yama, the Lord of Death. He says, now you have ensured, you are guaranteed my happy life in this world, in my family, with my father. But what about my destiny? What's going to happen to me after death? So please give me that boon so that I would be able to live happily in heaven for a long time. This is that boon. Now, thus far, Yama was very, very prompt in granting these boons. The Nachiketa asked for the third boon. Here you find a transition from early Vedic concept of life to Vedantic concept of life. As I mentioned yesterday and today also, the Vedanta deals with the ultimate philosophical and spiritual questions of existence. What's the nature of God? How can we become spiritually enlightened? These are some of the questions. Nothing to do with the everyday life situations. Ultimate spiritual questions. Here Nachiketa is asking for third boon. So he says, look here, there are many people who will tell you that this life is the only life that we can have. Death is a full stop that puts an end to everything. This body is the only thing that we can think of. When this body perishes, nothing remains. This is one view. And there is another view. And according to them, there is something that remains even after this body perishes. Now, yesterday, in Swamiji's lectures, even those of you have listened to reading, fine. This belief, many people had this belief. The Egyptians believed that this body could be preserved, so that it will enjoy all the comforts. But that was not a very spiritual concept. But again, it was a concept of postmortem existence. And there was also the belief that the part of souls become omniscient and omnipotent, so they should be worshipped, ancestor worship, and so on. But Nachiketa's request for the third boon takes us beyond all these concepts. His question is apparently very, very simple. This is third boon. Some people will tell you that after death nothing remains. According to some others, something immortal, something imperishable continues to exist even after death. Please explain this to me. In answer to this third request, Yama gives a detailed exposition of the highest principles of Vedanta. So, in these three boons, you can find slowly the Vedic culture evolves from a kind of happy, egalitarian, dharmic humanistic stage of life, to the concept of heaven, and finally to a higher transcendental vision of our existence. In answer to this third request, Yama will tell Nachiketas, look here, there is one reality which is eternal, imperishable, which is immanent in all beings. He lives in all of us. The idea that God lives within us and not without, not outside. This is a revolutionary contribution of Upanishads, Vedanta philosophy. These two ideas of Godhead, immanence and omnipresence. Omnipresence through immanence, that's a better way of putting it. In Sanskrit called Sarvavyapi is omnipresent and Antaryami is immanent. So God lives within all of us. God doesn't create this world and stands apart, sits apart. Rather, God Himself indwells in everything in this creation. And He drives this world. He manages this world by being present in everything. And through immanence, He is also omnipresent. And through immanence and omnipresence, He also called the transcendental reality. So, he says, Anoraniyan Makudo Mahiyan Atma Sijinto Nihitam Guhayam Tamakradu Pashyadi Vidasyoka Dhadu Prasada Mahimanam Atmanaha. One of the famous verses in the Upanishads. Now, here the teacher tells you this absolute reality called Atman, it is present in the smallest, tiniest of things, and is also present in the grandest and greatest and largest of things. How do we realize this? That's an interesting topic of discussion in Vedanta. We realize this through manifestation within. And how do we manifest this divinity within? By achieving mental purity. So, 4 stages of reaching this mental purity are explained in the Bhagavad Gita, which is in a way a commentary on the Vedas. You know, Gita's place in Hindu canonical literature, Vedantic canonical literature, is that of a commentary on Vedantic or Vedic philosophy. I mean, before going further, I must perhaps give you a simple idea of the canonical structure of Vedantic tradition. And then after giving that, I shall enter the subject, the methods of manifesting this divinity within. Nachikheta is discussing with Yama in this text. Our whole canonical literature is basically divided into 3 categories. The highest and most authentic canons are Vedas. Sometimes they are called Shruti. But actually Shruti itself means that's something that you learn by listening to. These scriptures used to be taught not by reading books, but by verbal process, by listening and memorization in ancient times. So the first important book in Vedantic tradition are the Vedas. And among the Vedas, the essence, the fundamental, the central texts were the Upanishads, because they constitute Vedanta, which means the essence or the final word or the conclusion of Vedas. It's called Vedanta, means mostly Upanishads, which constitute the metaphysical the spiritual, the philosophical portion of the Vedic literature. The second category, second in importance, is Smritis. Smritis were, in a way, they were codes of conduct, and they can also be called the constitutions in ancient times. There were altogether 18 fundamental Smritis. They range, maybe the earliest of them must have been written around 2700 BC, and right up to 2nd century BC, a number of Smritis or constitutional works of codes, law books were written, and they are totally 18 in number. They are second in authenticity and importance. The third category is the Puranas, mostly mythological books. Now, according to all teachers and lawgivers, if there is any conflict between the statements of the Vedas or Vedanta and other books, either Smritis or the Puranas, the law books or the mythological books, then we must discard the views of law books and mythological books and uphold the views of the Vedas, the Shrutis, because they are the most authentic. Now, why I am making this statement? Because in the Vedas, as I mentioned day before yesterday, you find the picture of a highly humanistic, egalitarian society, which was built upon the principles of equality of everything. But in the later works, Smritis, law books and mythological books, you find many rules and conventions which could be called as unjust or violating the principles of equality and justice in modern times. That's why I'm making this statement. Now, here, coming to this book, Bhagavad Gita has got a special place in this canonical literature. Bhagavad Gita is technically not a part of the Vedas. It is part of the Mahabharata, which has got only the status of a Smriti or a law book. But Gita, because of its unique philosophy, is universality and a deep spiritual orientation, it has got the status of Vedas or Shrutis, and according to most philosophers, Bhagavad Gita is the most authentic and exhaustive commentary on the Upanishads and Vedanta. And so in Bhagavad Gita, you find a very well chalked out, well ordered method that's recommended for achieving this mental purity that enables us to feel and experience the presence of the divine within us. And one important point that is stressed again and again is, belief is not what is emphasized. One of the most outstanding and unique aspects of Vedantic philosophy is, it doesn't ask you to believe in anything. It may ask you to believe, but it also says you should go beyond belief. You should feel, you should reach the experience level of what you believe in. So beyond belief, when we reach the experience level, then only we reach the ultimate goal. This is an important point stressed. In Gita, there are, as I said, 4 stages of reaching this mental purity. It is a very interesting analysis of human mind, the way human mind functions. It says the most primitive stage of human mind is a stage of ignorance, inertia, lethargy. When we are totally confused, we can't focus on anything. We cannot choose a path because we are totally confused. The second stage in an ascending order is when we decide to do what we consider to be our duty. If you cannot do your duty without being attached, then be attached but somehow do your duty. Because it is far better than not doing your duty at all. That's an important contribution of Gita. Gita makes it very clear. It's far better to do what we consider to be our duty with total attachment, plan and desire. It's far better to do so than not doing anything at all, because that's the most primitive state. A third higher stage which we should all try to aspire for is the ability to do our duty for its own sake without any attachment. So, and when we are able to do our duty without any attachment, then that duty, that work becomes a tool, a means for the manifestation of the divine within us. So first, we must work and worship, and then work as worship. And the last stage is when we don't think about work at all, everything becomes worship. So this is the highest state of spiritual enlightenment. And this could be achieved through innumerable paths. The 4 yogas mentioned in the Gita are interpretations of the 4 paths of both material and spiritual life as expounded in the Vedantic literature. The great contribution of Lord Krishna was that he analyzed these 4 paths which were somewhat obscure in the Vedantic literature, and he analyzed them into 4 distinct parts. Of course, they were integrated together in Gita as 4 different ways of approaching our highest spiritual goal. So today, this work, and then we'll have interaction now. We'll continue this discussion from tomorrow. So you can have interaction.
Swami, I have a question that may be superficial, but as you were reading the Upanishad, the Lord of Death had a different name in the beginning as in the end. I mean, you had used, Yama was who Nachiketas went to, but you mentioned a different name for the God of Death when his father was...
Mrityu.
Yes.
Mrityu is death.
Who is that other? Is that the same person?
Yeah, that's true. Mrityu is one of the synonyms of Yama. Mrityu literally means death. So the Lord of Death also came to be called Mrityu. Mrityu means death. That's it.
So he basically cursed him, go die. Mrityave Mahadadamiti.
Yes, he must have done it more as
angrily.
When a little boy pokes you when you are doing important work, then you wanted to get it off. That's it.
You did not go into the dissuasions and the temptations that...
We will come to that later.
Tomorrow.
Because I wanted to give a bird view of the overall picture, then we'll come to the details too.
Okay.
Because Yama was not ready to grant this boon.
Yeah.
Because if you teach the highest spiritual truth to a person who is not ready for it, then it may not produce the result, and also the student may misunderstand it. So I will come to that later because it's an elaborate process. But we don't really understand highest spiritual truth unless our mind is ready for it. Even if it is the highest truth, a person who is not yet ready, he will understand only from his perspective. So that's why Nachiketa is being tested again and again. It's more like very similar to the three temptations in the Bible. That's the thing. Three temptations in the Bible, where the devil asked Jesus to show a miracle. I can turn all these stones and pebbles into loaves of bread, and you can distribute among them. Let them follow you and all that. But Jesus didn't want that, because unless you follow God after your own free will, it will not take you to your goal. So many interesting similarities you find in the higher teachings of different religious traditions. We will come to that tomorrow. See, it takes a little longer time to explore. We'll come to that.
Some of the four stages you summarized at the very end. One was the ignorance, inertia. Second is duty with or without attachment.
Yeah.
The third one was doing duty for its own
Yes, without attachment.
And the
Fourth one is the state of being completely established in that detached, non-attached way of doing things. And at that stage, you don't think about work at all. The work itself becomes irrelevant. Everything becomes worship. Fight for the highest.
So is that same as doing work without palapek, without expecting?
Yes, but that's a state of being completely established in that non-attachment. That's the thing. Earlier, you are trying to get established. The fourth stage, you become so completely established in it. So the highest spiritual teacher, whatever he does, he doesn't think of it as work at all. So he doesn't have to say what I am doing is as worship. No, because actually it is worship.
It becomes nature. His own.
Yeah, nature.
So that's what Swami Vivekananda, or Swami Krishna, so Vivekananda got from Swami Krishna, defined that state of worship as a state of service to man.
Service. Yes.
So
But at that stage, you don't even do it as a service, because the service idea is transcendent. Right.
So what do you mean by nature? Natural, like it becomes your natural way of doing it?
When it becomes natural to us, we don't think of it at all. What we do naturally, we don't think of it. What we feel normally is our real nature. We don't think of it at all. When we think of it, when you give it a name, it means there's an effort. So it does not become natural to us. So, see, a person like Sri Ramakrishna, even when he was about to breathe his last, he was teaching. And now he didn't think he was teaching. Because teaching the world, the idea of service, all these things did not exist for him. Because he was established in the highest idea. You find many such, when you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you come across many interesting episodes. Suddenly you find a wandering mystic comes to the Dakshineshwar. He goes to the Ganga, takes a plunge and doesn't wipe out the water, and comes and eats with dogs and cats. And he stands in front of the deity, he chants a divine hymn, the whole temple trembles. Now, that person did not look for a towel or a soap to take bath. For him, the whole world was a divine play. Maybe that stage, Sri Ramakrishna was a bit apprehensive. Pray to Mother, let that not stage come to me. If that stage comes, I cannot teach anybody. So the point is, that stage is the stage of the highest mystics. That's what then it becomes natural to us.
Swami, so you mentioned mentioned there are quite a few smritis that have sort of different kinds of legal traditions or
Yes.
traditions mixed in. Are there other smritis like Gita in the sense that they have great value for us to study now, or are they more of a historical kind of interest to study now?
Gita.
I'm saying the other smritis.
Oh yeah, yes, certainly. Yes, as I mentioned, there are 18 such smritis, which are all law books. Now, many of them have been incorporated in Indian constitution. Because, India was a very huge country divided into innumerable kingdoms and principalities, each following its own smritis, its own law books, for a long time. So when India became a republic, what they did, they took many of the clauses from different constitutions, the Yajnavalkya Smriti, which elaborately describe property rights of family members, the rules of divorce, and what are the principles involved in distributing property. It's called Ayakrama. So all these are elaborately discussed in these ancient law books. And there are also differences and conflicts. So Indian constitution incorporated many of these into its regular constitution. Even now, many lawyers, many attorneys, famous ones, who argue frequently quote the original smritis. But they are not necessary, but they are already incorporated in the Indian constitution. Right now, they are not separately taken as authentic because many of them formed the core of the ancient Hindu code, which existed in India for the last 300 years. When 1947, when India became independent, all these were incorporated into Indian constitution, and Sharia laws were incorporated in the Indian constitution just for deciding, affecting the Islamic community and so on. Christians, Jews, Hindus, all follow one civil code. Islamic society follows a different one based on the Sharia, which is part of the constitution. So those smritis are still relevant because many of the clauses of the modern Indian constitution are taken from those smritis. That's it. Some of them are extremely egalitarian. I can give an example. Yajnavalkya Smriti has got an interesting verse which says that death sentence should be abolished. Yajnavalkya Smriti, it's famous one. Many of the smritis were very much advanced. Remember, they were all written long before Justinian's code came into existence. So, it's very interesting. In fact, they are now studied by many international legal experts for comparative study. So, many of these smritis included clauses which are highly egalitarian, which, in fact, a demand for the abolition of death sentence marks an advancement of social structure of those times. So there are many such things in the ancient Smriti books.
So, Swami, it's a Shruti, isn't it, that something was revealed to the rishis?
Yeah. Revealed and taught through oral tradition.
Only oral.
Yeah. But when you use the word revealed, they did spiritual practice and these spiritual truths were revealed to them. Later they were written, much later, but they were taught in the particular lineage of the rishis. Many of these rishis, many of the sages had their own lineage, their gotra, innumerable. So they all preserved the teachings of that particular sages. It's more like the ancient Jewish gotras, the 10 tribes, which is much more, of course, much bigger. So many sages and many saints taught what was revealed to them to their own disciples or their own children and grandchildren. The succession will continue like that. That's how the Vishwamitra, Vasishta, Bharadwaja, all these gotras means. lineages came into existence, which were all incorporated into one single body during the times when Upanishads were framed, because Upanishads belong to a later period of Vedic literature. Upanishads were revealed much later. Though in the early Vedic literature you don't find any discussion of the higher metaphysical truth. You don't find. It's the Upanishads which came much later that you find discussion of the fundamental nature of God, the ultimate destiny of human existence.
And Swamiji, what Nachiketa was asking, Jama, isn't it like how to get immortality, Amarata, right? And he was describing like how to meditate on Om.
We will discuss that tomorrow.
Okay.
In fact, that's why today what I did was I just tried to give the overall picture of the three boons to show that they represent three stages in the evolution of human civilization. From the empirical to the post-mortem heavenly experiences and then ultimate transcendental things.
So Swami, how was it that the Vedic lifestyle with the emphasis on harmony, and how was it that it was possible for that to be translated and elevated to a higher philosophical level? How did it come that that was possible?
Yes. Now, in the early Vedic period, students used to be taught these ceremonies. But in many of the mantras which they were taught as part of the rituals, which they were supposed to chant while performing the rituals, many of these mantras spoke of the higher metaphysical realities. For example, I can give you an example. Rigveda Samhita contains more than 1,000 suttas. Each sutta divided into innumerable verses called rigs. There are innumerable hymns. Suttas mean hymns, praising, in praise of long verses, in praise of different deities. Now, in many of these verses, you find, for example, you find one deity is sometimes interpreted, praised as a god who gives you boons for material prosperity, and also a god who gives you the highest transcendental wisdom. So that's why there are two types of interpretations. All these hymns could be interpreted as praises, hymns praising different deities, sages requesting for, praying for longevity, more sons and more children, progeny, more cattle, for success in war, all that you find. But towards the end of many of the suttas, you find the same deity is expounded as an all-pervading supreme reality. So this is sometimes interpreted as henotheism. There are 5 stages in interpreting Vedic hymns according to Max Muller. He was the one who expounded a methodology for interpreting Vedic hymns in modern terms. So, traditional Pandits just memorized and studied and taught as a tradition succession. Max Muller, when he edited, he was the one who, for the first time, tried to analyze and find an inherent method of interpreting a successive evolution of Godhead in these hymns. So he says that many of the suttas are, to begin with, pantheistic. In the sense, for example, Saraswati Suktam, Sindhu Suktam, these are 2 rivers actually. Pavamana Suktam means air, so So many of these hymns are sometimes pantheistic in the sense they equate natural phenomena to God. And at a later stage, according to him, and that's a very sensible, logical analysis, which gives you another perspective of approaching Vedic literature from a different angle. I mean, from the angle of comparative philology, comparative philosophy. So, then he says there is also what's called pantheism, which is more subtle. So you equate different natural phenomena to different deities, but you also interpret that that deity is inherent, is indwelling within the natural phenomena. As an inherent principle within this natural phenomena, they control, they regulate the function of, say for example, clouds, lightning, rivers, trees, air. All these are natural phenomena, equated nature. So Varuna, for example, is a god who controls the oceans. He is not only the one who sits above, but also he is inherent, he indwells in the water principle society. Agni is fire god. Agni is not one who creates fire and sits apart, controlling it as a mechanic controlling a machine or a computer. He sits within it. He is inherent, it's a pantheism. So the concept of inherence or immanence. So then there is called polytheism. That's again not very different. Where Max Muller says that the Vedic sages believed in the plurality or multiplicity of different gods and goddesses. Then this is called henotheism, which means in certain cases, in certain mantras, certain Vedic hymns, they are interpreted as natural phenomena. But sometimes these deities are interpreted as a single, supreme, monotheistic Godhead. Monotheism is the next stage. In monotheism, a deity is not just one of the different deities, but is a supreme, all-pervading, governing deity. Indra, for example, is the one supreme Godhead. In some suttas addressed to the god of air, that god of air may be interpreted as supreme deity. So it's called monotheism. In monism, you find there is the idea of going beyond the personal attributes, everything. So in the Rigveda Samhita, there are innumerable verses which later find Upanishad literature, which tells you that when you reach the experience level, all the names and forms vanish. So one central theme that is stressed again and again is the reality is one. When we begin, we find differences of forms and names and so on. But when we reach the ultimate goal of experience, these differences fade away and everything is seen to merge into one reality. The famous and most oft-quoted verse in the Rigveda, it comes in the Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, everywhere. I mean, Indram Mitram Varunam Akniraku Atho Divyasa Suparna Gurutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bhagudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. If I translate, you'll be struck by the sublimity of the concept. It says Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni. These are all different deities. Let us say in modern times, you may different concepts of God in different religious traditions, like that. These are various names which enlightened people use to call one reality. So in fact, it is one reality, but that one absolute reality is addressed in different names, and sometimes different forms are attributed to them. But Ekam Sat, but the reality is one. Enlightened people may call them by different names and may attribute different forms. In the same Rigveda Samkhya, there is a mantra which comes in Atharvediya Mundaka Upanishad. Yada Nadis Chandamana Samudri Astam Gachanti Namarupe Vikaya Yada Namarupa Vimuktaha Parat Param Purusham Ubayati Divya. Is another imagery. Think of many rivers, maybe hundreds of rivers. They flow through different directions, in different directions, covering different regions. And when they merge in the ocean, they become one. So the water that is already entered the ocean loses its diversity, its plurality in terms of names and forms. The particular water from Ganga, which has already entered the Bay of Bengal, that water loses its particular name as Ganga. Or here in American context, there may be a rivers, which join the Atlantic or Pacific or any of the bays. So when the water reaches the destination, they merge into the ocean, which is one. So the diversity, the plurality, the difference in names and forms exist only till the rivers reach the ocean and flow into the ocean. Once they join the ocean, the differences are gone. The plurality, diversity are gone. Now, similarly, Swami Vivekananda and later, some of his later lectures makes very clear. There are 4 stages in the evolution of spiritual life. We begin with rituals, mythology, philosophy, and finally experience. So here also the same. In fact, the idea comes from the Vedas, Rigveda Samkhya. When you join the ocean, which is like experience, then all the names and forms, diversities and pluralities, differences vanish. So differences do exist because religions cannot be the same if we interpret them as mere rituals. Rituals are different in each religion. So also mythologies and even philosophical systems. So there are common points of agreement between different religious philosophies, but still not complete identity. But when you reach the mystical element of experience, then everything merges into one. So all these great thought currents, which later Vedantins like Shankaracharya, Vivekananda, Sridharmeshwara, later in 20th century, Ramana Maharshi, all of them taught, they are all found in the Rigveda Samkhya itself. But the point is, Vedic society in the early days, the early Vedic society did not emphasize this mystical spiritual element. It gave importance, but it was more focused on a highly egalitarian social structure built on the principles of dharma and harmony. That's the idea. So we have still about 10 minutes, so we can discuss.
Swami, I grew up with the idea that in America maybe that the ego is considered, proud, like it has a negative connotation. But can you tell me that does the ego have a positive role in our journey, our spiritual journey?
Ego has a positive role. If you read lives of many great saints and mystics, sometimes they, at least in Christian mystical tradition, they often refer to the temptations of the devil, testing and all that. And in the Hindu religion, devotional mystical literature, Bhagavata, Narada, Bhakti Sutras, you come across the same. So unless you have a strong will, you cannot be an ideal devotee. I want to just emphasize this point. The 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita deals with Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. There, the teacher, Lord Krishna, gives some of the most important necessary qualifications for an ideal spiritual aspirant, devotee. It begins like Santushta Satatam Yogi Yatatma Dridhanishchaya. One should be contented, one should have perfect control over the senses. And the most important thing that's mentioned is Dridhanishchaya, means you should have a iron will, strong will. Without a strong determination, you won't be able to face the temptations or face the obstacles. See, suppose some may argue that if you want to get the grace of God, you should be devoid of ego. But before you get the grace of God, before you are able to be benefited by the grace of God, you should achieve grace worthiness. The example of Saint Teresa of Avila, you find in the maybe the first volume of Saint Teresa of Avila. There is a wonderful synthesis of human effort and God's grace. The place of positive ego, power of mind and strong determination, self-effort are all emphasized. So she gives the example of a farmer irrigating the field. The field is now not ready for irrigation. It is full of thorns, pebbles, stones and weeds and grass and things like that. So if God's grace comes in the form of rains, you won't get much result because more weeds and grass may grow than seeds. So you have to make the field ready for irrigation before you start the process of irrigation. For that you have to remove the weeds, the grass and pebbles and stones, which require human effort. And if the farmer doesn't have an iron will, strong will, determination, and a strong faith in himself, he will not be able to undertake that process of clearing the field, preparing the field. And then if it starts raining, it's God's grace. Then he doesn't have to work hard for irrigation. There's another interesting story in our devotional scripture, Bhagavata Purana, which you find in the 4th book of Bhagavata, 8th to 12th chapter. In 5 chapters, there's the story of a small boy who leaves his home, Dhruva, the name, Dhruva. He leaves his home. You find this story mentioned in the cradle tales of Hinduism, or somewhere in the Sister book. You find that. He leaves his home because he was hurt by his father and stepmother ill-treated him. And his mother told him, you go to a forest and pray to God, God will solve your problem. And as the little boy is walking through the forest, a great sage appears before him. He saw the little boy walking from a distance. And suddenly he exclaims, what a wonderful, strong determination this little boy has got. But he wanted to test the boy. So he comes to him and asks him, where are you going? He said, well, I'm hurt. My stepmother and father ill-treated me, so I'm going to forest. I want to meditate and I want to get the blessings of God so that my father will treat me with affection. All those things. A little boy asking for domestic problems to be solved. So Narada told him, you see, these are all natural small things. You're a little boy. You should not be walking alone in this forest. You should go back to your palace, play with your friends. These domestic problems, ill treatment of stepmother, all these things are natural. Don't worry about it. Narada was trying to test him, whether the little boy was ready for the spiritual undertaking, going to a forest and meditation. But Dhruva is made of sternest stuff, very determined boy. He said, well, I will not return home without achieving my goal. And then Narada was very happy. And he blessed him and instructed him how to meditate and so on. And Dhruva became a great saint and also very successful. Later he became the emperor. So the point is, a strong determination, an iron will is as important for a spiritual seeker as humility and devotion. Is very important. That's why Lord Krishna gives very important Dridhanishchaya. An ideal devotee of mine, my ideal devotee, will be a man or a woman of iron will, strong determination. Without that, nobody can succeed in spiritual life. In fact, in spiritual life, you need a much stronger determination than in secular life, perhaps. Because the problems are more subtle, maybe internal, in spiritual life.
Since you brought up ego in the West, this has been an inquiry of mine because it's an ambiguous word that's problematic. I don't exactly know what it means. Everybody seems to have a different meaning for it. The original Greek word is existence, I am. But then as we go on through time, we get into psychology, and every school of psychology uses this word to refer to something different. We seem, in the common sense, to use it as personality or inflated character or some kind of false identity. So if we go along with this way, Ramakrishna has some good advice. Keep the ripe ego, renounce the unripe ego.
This is the right ego that Dhruva had and Shantaris are speaking about for the farmer. The right ego helps you to fight problems from within yourself and also from outside. That's what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about. Pakka ami and kacha ami is called. The right ego. That's what Shantaris is referring to. That's what Dhruva had, which enabled him to reach his goal. So ego with a spiritual orientation, that's what is called ripe ego. So the farmer that Sri Ramakrishna refers to, who was going to become a monk or a man of renunciation, the other one who was fickle-minded, who was trying to renounce in installments. The farmer was ready to do it in lump sum. So you can see the difference. So without positive ego, spiritually oriented ego, no one can succeed in spiritual life. But I have one rejoinder. Normally, people become proud in a very childish sense. So I want to ask questions. Now, there they ask questions. Actually, if a sincere spiritual seeker is really proud and proud of his intellectual reasoning power and is also very sincere, he will realize eventually the limitation of ego. But if he is sincere, so you find one of Sri Ramakrishna's greatest disciple, maybe the greatest was Swami Vivekananda, who was a daredevil questioner. But Sri Ramakrishna found there was something great in this man. He meant what he was talking about. When he asked questions, there was no pretentiousness. People sometimes want to be seen to be intellectual. They want to be seen, to be interpreted as, oh, he's a thinking person, intellectual person. But in all other matters, they may be totally irrational or non-intellectual. But in Swami Vivekananda's case, he was an agnostic, in fact. He was not ready to believe in God. Even Keshav Chandra Sen was not willing to go to the Dakshineshwar temple and to pronounce for the deity. But he became one of the greatest disciples. So the point is, if a spiritual seeker has a positive ego with the real sincerity, then that seeker will eventually understand where to stop. He will understand the limitation of ego. But if the ego is just mere intellectual, pretentious intellectualism, then it won't take him anywhere. Sometimes our mind plays false games. We want to be seen to be intellectual, to be rational. So genuine sincerity coupled with positive ego is a great help in spiritual life. I told you just now, I wanted to mention that point. I was referring to the three temptations. Now I will come to your question later. I refer to this because it's one of the most sublime pieces in world literature. It is not coming from a spiritual literature, so I give it much more importance. Now, Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, there is a famous Grand Inquisitor, and the fifth chapter, one of the eternal classics of human genius in literature, in fiction. Now, there, of course, I don't want to go to details. Jesus comes in the prison, and the cardinal comes to the prison, and he questions Jesus. You have come back again. For the last 1500 years, we were trying to do everything in your name. Means you are coming and interfering with what we are doing. The cardinal telling. It's a very revealing, And in fact, many of the later theologians tried to form their views on the Grand Inquisitor fantasy. It's a fantasy poem written by Ivan, one of the radical nihilists and intellectualists of that time. In the character, it's a fictitious character. Now, the three temptations are mentioned. The devil, he told you he would convert all the pieces of pebbles and stones in loaves of bread, and you didn't accept him. And he took you to the top of the tower and asked you to jump, and you didn't accept him. And he promised to make you the emperor of the world, you didn't accept him. So you rejected him. The cardinal is actually censuring Jesus. Now, the interpretation that Dostoevsky gives is that if Jesus tried to bribe people by distributing loaves of bread to follow him, they would not reach the kingdom of heaven. So we should all follow the path of spirituality of our own. We can be bribed into spirituality. Now, to resist this temptation, you need ego. To say to the devil, no, when the devil gave presented three temptations before Jesus, he needed ego. No, I won't follow. Why do you? So you find positive ego, one of the classic illustrations. Nobody has succeeded in spiritual life without positive, spiritually oriented, God-oriented ego. What Sri Ramakrishna calls mature ego, Pakan. Nobody can succeed. Sri Ramakrishna himself had to face problem, but was man of steel, heart, determination. Thus became the great world teacher. Vivekananda was not a weakling. You don't find a great spiritual. Why you go to San Francisco, see the old temple, Swami Tattwamayananda, when he came, everything was in flames. Luckily there was no money. And this Swami built the first Hindu temple in Western world in less than 5 months. Don't you think he had a strong ego? Spiritual ego, God-oriented ego. The ego built upon the strong faith that Sri Ramakrishna was guiding him. You find in the Gargi's book, if there was the least unselfishness, behind this it will stand. If there is the least selfishness, it will fall. And it stood when the earthquake came. So you will find the whole spiritual history, one single spiritual seeker who who did not have this positive, God-oriented or spiritually oriented ego. It's a must more than secular life. Because that ego takes you to a state beyond itself, beyond ego. A spiritually oriented positive ego will help you to transcend itself. The other ego will push you within the non-spiritual ego, will keep you bound within itself. So I think we will continue the discussion tomorrow. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ram Krishna Paramastu.